Traci, why don't you kick us off?
Awesome. Well, I am so pleased to be here. And if I just may have a geek out moment, our house is like one of my favorite videos in the whole world. So I just have to go like not worthy and then just get that out of my system. I'm sorry. Just had to do that. Okay.
Thank you. That's good to know. I always think about that video, that DVD. On the cover, there's a quote from a newspaper, and it's misspelt as triumphant instead of triumphant. So when anyone says our house, I always think, yeah, triumphant.
Well, I have major cred with my husband over this interview just for that. So sorry to take away from Matilda, which is amazing, but I just had like a little flutter from my 80s girl fandom I had to have.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Well, to start, this film is just so amazing. And I think that it touches anyone at any age, as dolls work just in general does. And I just wanted to speak to what you think in our place in the world right now, the idea of two wrongs sometimes making a right, and how Matilda, the being naughty a little bit to get what needs to be done, how that kind of speaks in a clever way, like she's naughty, but she's not malicious, you know. And I really, the playful way that that is used in dolls works from the very beginning, but the fun way that that's played with in the storytelling, since I have you, Matthew, to start, since I did, maybe we could start there with my first question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I was once asked in an interview a long time ago about when I was doing the stage show Matilda, about which superpower I could have if I had any superpower. And I said, I'd actually probably want Matilda's superpower. And the interviewer said to me, oh, telekinesis. And I said, no, courage, because her biggest power is her immense courage, you know, for somebody so small and against such huge odds. And I think that's the really inspiring thing. And when we're doing the film, you know, I was conscious of that as a sort of a universal aspect of the story, but also other little particular touch points that I haven't ever talked about, and they're very subtly buried into the film. But when Matilda goes off to Miss Honey's house and it's pouring with rain, I wanted her to wear the same anorak that Greta Thunberg used to wear, but in a different color, because of I just saw the sort of rebelliousness and the quest for justice and making the world a better place in that little girl as well. At the time, I thought a lot about Malala, who was, you know, standing up for her rights. Around the time that the stage show was opening, she came over to England, and then now, and the Iranian girls and you know, who are really revolting in their own way and standing up for what's right in Iran as well. So, and then, you know, when I decided that the school should have a statue outside the front of Trunchbull, it was obvious that what had to happen to that statue at the end. And when we were developing the screenplay for that, and we'd put in that the kids pulled the statue down, it was a time when, coincidentally, just shortly after that, statues were falling around the world for different reasons. And it wasn't intentionally written as an echo of that, but it became coincidentally very resonant. So I think I've always found, you know, first and foremost, this is an amazing, inspiring story that works as an entertainment. But I think the reason it stays with you, or affects me anyway, on lots of levels, is because it's got real power of ideology in it. When Matilda, she says, that's not right. All of our sense of injustices that we know about life and that we feel about life, you know, resonate with that. We all have a "that's not right" shout inside us. And the Matildas are on that crusade as our ambassador in a way. So I love that. I love the fact that it's an entertainment. In fact, it's mostly a comedy, but it carries inside it, because of who Matilda is and what she stands for, it carries these stronger messages as well. And part of that, as you say, is that there are times when, if the rules are wrong, you have to sometimes bend them, or use your creative imagination to imagine the world being a better place. So I think it is a good lesson. It's an inspiring story.
Yeah, I definitely got that. Like, I felt like, all right, I'm going to go do something now. So thank you.
Great. Tegan?
Hi. So first off, I just wanted to say I love the movie so much. It was so good. I don't usually get like emotional during movies, but I was getting a little emotional at some parts. So I just really loved it. And my question is, so what were you able to achieve in this movie with all the resources that you had that you weren't able to achieve in the stage show?
Well, one of the big things, the two big things that were exciting were these opposing things: opening out, introducing scale and scope that you can't fit onto a stage. So going up into the sky, having 200 children, having a giant school, being on vehicles, moving from from bicycles to buses to airplanes, running through a forest, even doing something in the rain. All of these scale and scope things were new. And then the other thing is the close-up, which we can't do on stage, which is simply just putting a camera right up against an emotional moment in a story and a character's face to make the situation more scary or more emotionally moving in some way, or dramatic, is things you can't do on stage. And the other thing is that, the resources that we had to make this film meant that Ellen could rehearse hundreds of kids for weeks and weeks and weeks, and so that they could achieve sequences that you would never be able to you can't do the equivalent on stage. You can't get that many people, you haven't got enough room, but also you don't have enough time and enough money to be that creative and inventive as well. So it was a little bit for Ellen. You can say this in your own way, but for both of us and for other creatives on the film as well, it was a lot of the time you could use your imagination to say, well, maybe it's this. And then we would go and ask the producers if we were allowed to do something that big. And generally speaking, they'd say yes, if we can find the time to do it, and if we apportion the money, we can do it. And so the sky was the limit, in lots of ways, in a way that isn't true on stage.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you say.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to agree. I think that's exactly right. It felt like the scale that we were able to play with, really, we would literally be going, oh, wow, what about this? Or what about that? And then some of the things, I mean, Matthew at one point, I think, talked about a rotating corridor. Do you remember when you sort of were like, oh, maybe it could be that? I mean, that's quite an extraordinary thing if you imagine children even taking that idea on. So it was sort of, it was limitless, really, in that way. And you could really go, okay, well, how does it feel to be a kid in that situation? And how does it feel to feel that emotion at that point as a kid in that situation? And then you're able to really explore and really play with, like 60, 70, 80 children sometimes. And just that number of bodies creates a massive dynamic, really, that you can never get on stage. So yeah, it was amazing, really.
It was interesting what led different decisions. So many decisions are led by so many random things. But I remember when we were location scouting, and we looked at lots of different schools for these school exteriors for Crunchem Hall, and all of the ones we looked at were much smaller than the ones that we found. And when I found this one, I said, well, I think that's it. If we imagine gates and barbed wire and everything in front of this huge building, that's Crunchem Hall. And then in the same breath, I said, but that does mean we need hundreds of children, because the other places we looked at were much, much smaller. But if the school's that big, obviously you need loads of kids to populate it. And once we've committed to that school, that's what led to there being hundreds of kids in the school song and in Revolting Children and Bruce.
Thank you.
Hi, Ellen, just that choreography for the Red Beret Girl. I think I've watched it maybe 100 times on TV and online and over again. So it just brings chills every single time. And I've read your interviews, so I'm just gonna ask like probably the same questions, but you know, what inspired you for that choreography? And you know, how long did it take to shoot all of that?
Well, I think the idea actually was what sort of pushed the choreography. I think Matthew and I talked originally about, I mean, you've probably read this, but I'll just say it just in case that, you know, he talked about wanting it to feel like sort of the dams bursting and the kids bursting through the school like they were water. And then we were trying to look at how we might storyboard and keep that sense of energy going. And then we discussed how on the stage, that song is led by just the Bruce character. So we talked about how we might split that between the two characters, the Hortensia and the Bruce. And then we literally sat in COVID, didn't we? We were on Zoom, I think, a lot, and we were storyboarding through what that sequence might look like. And I think we sort of came to, okay, well, Bruce could do his corridor, and then Hortensia would answer with hers. So you sort of, you know, you've got that question and answer, building them into the big lobby where they then sort of galvanize all of the students together. So I kind of had that idea, you know, we built all the way through. I knew obviously the lyrics are sort of giving you a huge amount of information in terms of, you know where you are story-wise, you know what you're trying to do. And I guess the composition of Tim's, that section, it gives it a slightly sort of off-kilter energy. And then we were trying to work out how we could sort of keep that sort of cannonball feeling going. And so then that's where the parkour element came in. And I found this amazing guy called Dan Edwards, who runs this, you know, these companies called Parkour Generations. They're everywhere, and he's hugely inspiring. He teaches children to do these incredible things, you know. So I was like, well, actually, I'd love them to feel like they were superhuman, that they could literally bounce off walls. And so then we discussed more, and and I said, well, why don't I make a sequence that has tried to make, you know, something that has both dance and parkour in it. And I already had a huge amount of material. I mean, way back, I did a huge amount of stuff with hockey sticks. It was originally going to go out in the playground, and jackets and hockey sticks, and they would dive rolling and all of that stuff. So I had huge amounts of actual dance, if that makes sense. So then I originally was going to keep the hockey stick, because there's a lyric that comes just before it where that's mentioned. But obviously hockey sticks in that narrow corridor at that speed with parkour kids felt a tiny bit too challenging. So I took the hockey sticks away and then worked on trying to make that material travel, and then started adding in the parkour elements that I wanted to use. And the designers were amazing. They facilitated putting certain things in certain places so that once the camera was moving at the correct speed, it kept the energy. The kids would then be able to sort of intersperse between the dancers and get up onto these things and then front flip off. So it took a long time, that sequence. I mean, it's only like, I think it's like 25 seconds or something.
But I've
I mean,
watched it like 100 times.
well, yeah, I mean, that's it. It's interesting. I think when we did it, you kind of knew, I did know, like when we were watching it, it did feel, once all of the elements were working together, like the speed of the camera, the parkour children, the actual dance, the kids crossing in and out of it, and then Matthew, you know, was adding airplanes and the sort of chaos of it. You could feel it was super exciting, even on camera, by the end, like once all the elements were in the right place. But that did take a long time, because there was, initially you could watch it in the room and it felt so exciting, and then I'd watch it back on the iPhone and it would feel really flat, because maybe the sort of, you know, the kid doing the somersault was in the wrong place, or the travel wasn't quite far enough, and so it was quite a thing to navigate. But yeah,
we should have a little shout to Ozzy, who never gets any mentions, but
Ozzy,
he's our
yeah.
our Steadicam operator. And if you think it's exciting to watch, imagine being stuck in the middle of it, or running backwards, trying to film it.
Because
I was
that's
going to mention that with the camera work, it felt like I was there, you know, in the midst of it. I mean, without getting hit and hurt by the kids, but it really felt like you were a part of the scene. And that's what I think made it more exciting, because you were there kind of getting out of the way, but watching and wanting to be a part of it. And I thought the camera work just made it feel as if like you could put yourself there and you're in there watching the excitement and feeling the excitement. So yeah, sorry, Ellen, what were you going to say? Sorry.
I think that's it. I mean, the camera was, it had to be choreographed. Like literally they, you know, when we were starting out and, you know, taking Matthew's idea, it was like I was dragging my assistant back, like just for safety, like on their top. And then obviously, like the more complex it got, it could only work in a certain way. And then poor Ozzy was there with this huge kit on, and Warwick was like behind him, trying to navigate him backwards at breakneck speed while these children are just throwing themselves. And I mean, amazing kids. They, not a second did they think, oh, there's this huge camera kit, I'm not going to do that. They were just, it was like, you just need to keep going, because these kids were just going. Amazing, fearless.
Well, I would love to see the behind the scenes with the big cameras and the kids. If you guys ever have any footage, that would be, it's so great to see.
More to come, Layla. Traci, do you want to hop in?
Yes, speaking of the building in that scene, I actually felt like you two worked together building the arc of the choreography across the film, from the first point that Matilda actually does a cartwheel to, you know, her picking up a friend and her moving more and dancing more. There felt like an intensity growing with just a couple of moves along the way. Like I felt like you interjected her dancing or a little bit of movements here and there. So by the time that we grew into that, it felt very, it didn't feel like, hey, we're doing a dance, you know, and I really appreciated that, because and my children, my teens, I still call them my kids. I think that it does a lot to include more non-musical watchers into the piece, because that can be off-putting, I think, sometimes to people, that it's like, oh, here we go into this the song and dance. And I wanted to know if you felt like if that was very conscious, or if that's just the way it worked, and how much did you guys work together in choreography and dancing all the way through, or was it more like you came in, Ellen, at just certain moments?
Matthew?
The starting point of all that is Tim Minchin writes certain kinds of songs for musicals, which in terms of not alienating people who don't like musicals, he's the perfect person in a way, because his songs they're not arbitrary opportunities for people to sing and dance. They are narrative. They serve a strong narrative purpose each time. So you can treat the songs as an extension of the spoken story, and characters who have a psychological, emotional arc, they don't have to put that on hold for a song. Songs are building blocks in that arc all the time. So that Tim has written the sort of songs that do that. Dennis Kelly has written the sort of script, working with Tim and myself years ago, to create a sort of flow through the piece, which some musicals don't operate like that. And then you add to that what's particularly true of Ellen as a choreographer is her interest in narrative through dance as well, and the sort of emotion and psychology and story staying operational and key at the heart of all of the musical numbers. So in terms of what you're identifying as a shape, a landscape, an anatomy of the story and character going all the way through, that's partly to do with that's a large part to do with who Dennis Kelly, Tim, Minchin, Ellen, and myself as the sort of coordinator of all of those separate things. We all share a lot of a similar approach. I think that the other thing, the way that shape happens overall, is partly by thinking about it a lot and by having time to prepare. And I think, one of the things this film had that lots of films don't have is time. And the reason we had time is because there was a full start. We were going to be doing it a year earlier than we did it. And then we couldn't because of COVID. And suddenly we found ourselves with a lot more preparation time that was absolutely invaluable. But it meant that we could consider shape and detail more than some people get a chance to with film. But also, I have this thing anyway as a director, which is you have to give the audience a treat every 2 or 3 minutes. It has to be something that puts electricity back in. And if you know you're going to do treats every 2 or 3 minutes of some kind or another, points of interest, points of spark, points of kinetic energy, then that logically tells you you've got to save something. You're still going to be doing that in an hour and a half's time. So you've got to have something extra to deliver. There's always got to be something that you haven't already given that you're going to give, and knowing planning how to do that is important. Ellen?
I think that's, yeah, I mean, you've summed it up very well. I would say that, Matthew, Tim, Dennis, just the whole structure sort of gives you a very clear shape of where you're going. And obviously, Matthew and I have been with the show for a very long time. So we know that we're going, in terms of choreographic biggest moment, you're going to Revolting Children. So that whatever happens, you've got to pull out the sort of big thing at that. For me, you've got to know what that is. And how do you set up a world where, as you rightly say, movement and expression through movement is normal? And the best way, I guess, to do that is to watch a child creeping downstairs in a rhythm, cartwheeling across a landing, bouncing on a bed, getting up to a sort of thing in a bathroom, but it's all done to musical lyrics, counts, So right from the beginning, you're sort of embedding this world, which is very much based in movement storytelling. So then all you have to do is keep, as Matthew says, keep changing it up. And actually having the locations, that's a huge gift. Of course, you don't have that on stage, and to be able to not have to play the wide shot all the time, like genius. Like you're not having to cater for a full thing. You can literally build the story and sort of dial up the movement as you're going. So yeah.
Well, you did a really good job. It really was well. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. The other thing is that the opening number, of course, Miracle, does something else, which it sort of says, it grabs it's intended to grab the audience and say, okay, folks, hold tight, because this is a film that's going to move with a lot of energy, and people are going to sing and people are going to dance. So just get that out of the way now.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't sort of creep in. You know, sometimes people try to sneak in the first song and dance just in case they don't want to scare people off. And but this, we decided that for lots of reasons, that opening number can justifiably be brassy, bold, you know, very, very high energy, and it's full of a brashness, which is the opposite of our central character. She doesn't fit that sort of brash world, and but it served a good technical job as well of sort of bursting the bubble straight away and saying it's a musical, and then everything that came after that feels much more organic and carefully sort of developed and things like that, because it's almost like a commercial. Isn't it, the first thing? It's like a TV commercial or something.
Yeah.
And it makes everything else look a bit more
Tame.
narratively sort of bedded in together carefully.
Well done. Thank you.